The Hedley Kow, a story from England. There was once an old woman who earned her living by going on errands and doing odd jobs for the farmers' wives in the village where she lived. Although she only earned her midday meal and a little bit of cheese and bread to bring home for her supper, she was always cheerful, as if she hadn't a want in the world. Each day she got up early. She gathered branches and pine cones and put them right next to her hearth, so that when she got home in the evening she could have a little fire. She had meager wants. Her cottage was small, was poorly furnished, and it stood by itself on the outskirts of the village. But she kept saying she was quite content to live alone, and she didn't mind the long walk home at all. It was pleasant. Nonetheless, the farmers' wives of Hedley made sure to send her on her way before sunset, because after dark the Hedley Kow was abroad, and the Hedley Kow had terrified villagers there in Hedley since times long past. It wasn't clear whether he was a bogey or a hobgoblin, but the village folk knew that he could assume terrible shapes, fearful shapes, and scare people out of their wits. He could chase them home, hooting, bellowing, raucous laughter, and other times he would enrage them with all manner of mischiefs and pranks. It was a summer evening, and it was getting on toward dark, and the old woman was hurrying to get home, when she came upon a big black pot lying by the side of the road. "Now that," she said, stopping to look at it, "would be just the thing for me, if I had anything to put into it. Who could have left it here for me?" She looked all around to see who it might belong to, but she could see no one, either in the fields or on the road. "Maybe it'll have a hole in it," she said. "Aye, that'll be how they've left it lying. But that'll do fine to put something in. I'm thinking I'll just take it home anyway." So she bent her stiff old back and lifted the lid to look inside. "Mercy me!" she cried as she jumped back. "If it isn't full to the brim with gold pieces!" Well, for a while she couldn't do anything but walk around her treasure, admiring the yellow and gold and wondering at her good luck. "Well, I do be feeling rich and grand." Presently she began to think about how she could best get it home with her. She couldn't see any other way than by fastening one end of her shawl to it and dragging it after her along the road. "Well, I'll have all night to think what I'll do with it," she said to herself. I could buy a grand house. I could live like a queen. Maybe I'll just bury it in a hole at the foot of the garden. I could put a bit on the chimney near the teapot as an ornament. Ugh, I'd feel so grand I don't know myself rightly. Now she was kind of tired from dragging this heavy weight behind her, so she stopped to rest for a minute and turned to make sure that her treasure was safe. When she looked at it, why, it wasn't a pot of gold at all. It was a great lump of shining silver. Stared at it. She rubbed her eyes. She stared at it again. It was still a great lump of silver. "I'd have sworn it was a pot of gold," she said at last, "but I reckon I must have been dreaming. Aye, now, that's a change for the better. It'll be far less trouble to look after, and not so easily stolen. Gold pieces are a sight of a bother to keep safe, you know. No, I'm well rid of them, and with my bonny lump of silver I'm as rich as can be." She set off homeward again, cheerfully planning all the grand things she was going to do with the money. It wasn't long, however, before she got tired again. She had to stop and rest. Then she turned back to look at her treasure, and as soon as her eyes set on it, she cried out, "Oh my! Now it's a lump of iron. Well, if that beats all, but that's real convenient. I can sell it as easy and get a lot of pennies for it. Aye, it's much handier than a lot of gold and silver that keep me awake nights, thinking I'd be robbed. No, a lump of iron is a good thing to have in the house. You never can tell what you might need it for." So she went on again, chuckling to herself on her good luck, till presently she glanced over her shoulder just to make sure it was still there. "What's this?" she cried, as soon as she saw it. "Oh, it's gone and turned into a great stone. How could it know? How could it know that I was just wanting something to hold my door open with? Ah, that's a good change. It's a fine thing to have good luck. And all in a hurry to see how the stone would look in its corner by her door, she just trotted off down the hill and stopped at the bottom beside her own gate. When she turned around to unfasten her shawl from the stone, which this time seemed to lie quiet and unchanged on the path, well, she could see the stone quite plainly as she bent her stiff back to untie the shawl end. But all of a sudden, it gave a jump and a squeal, and it grew in a moment as big as a huge horse. It threw down 4 lanky legs, it shook out 2 long ears, and it flourished a tail. And then it kicked its feet into the air and laughed raucously. The old woman stared at it as it capered and shrieked and rolled its red, shiny eyes. "Well," she said at last, "I do be the luckiest body. Fancy me seeing the Hedley Kow all to myself, and making so free with it, too." The Hedley Kow stopped short in its rearing and bellowing to glare at her. "You're not frightened?" "Not me," she laughed. "'Tis a rare sight you are. Most folks shout and curse at me." "Aye, and they run away screaming," he said. "Well, there's no harm done," she answered. "I still have my bit of cheese and bread for my supper, don't I?" She gathered her shawl about her and opened her little gate. But when she looked round, instead of the great gangly horse, there stood a small man in a pointy cap, scuffling his feet on the path. He was as brown as a russet apple, apart from his scraggly white beard. "Well, now," said the old woman kindly, "I don't have much, but you're welcome to come in for a bit of supper." "Don't mind if I do," said the Hedley Kow. So he sat down to supper with the old woman, and somehow the bit of cheese became a large chunk, and then there suddenly appeared on the table some nicely boiled brown eggs and crumpets for their tea. They made a cheerful meal of it, and after they'd finished they sat beside the fire while the Hedley Kow regaled the old woman with stories of his pranks around Hedley. She laughed until tears streamed down her cheeks, and declared that she'd never had such a pleasant evening, or one that passed so quickly. Now, as time went on, the little brown man came by often for a wee bit of supper and an evening of talk, and when the old woman found her woodpile always stacked high, and her cupboards always stocked with food, she very wisely said nothing about it to anyone else. And the village folk still talked fearfully of the Hedley Kow, or cursed him for his mischief, but the old woman would chuckle and say, "Oh, he be not that bad. Happen he likes to kick up his heels a bit, he do." And that, as they say, is that.